The gunshot that shattered the window of the stagecoach was the last sound Clara Morgan heard before rough hands dragged her into the desert darkness. And when she woke 3 days later in a bandit camp with her wrists bound so tight the rope had carved angry red welts into her skin, she knew her father's enemies had finally made good on their threats. The Arizona Territory in 1882 was unforgiving country, a landscape of red rock and endless sky where men made their own justice and women learned quickly that survival meant more than just staying alive. Clara had known this truth her whole life, raised on her father's ranch outside Prescott, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of captivity. The bandits who had taken her were led by a man named Garrett Slade, a former Confederate soldier turned outlaw who believed Clara's father owed him money from a land deal gone wrong. For 72 hours, they kept her tied to a post in their camp, barely giving her water, certainly no food, while they sent ransom demands and waited for a response that never came. The rope burned deeper with every movement. Clara tried not to struggle, tried to conserve her strength, but the desert heat was merciless, and the bonds never loosened. Her captors largely ignored her except to occasionally throw insults or make threats about what they would do if her father did not pay. She counted the hours by the movement of the sun across the sky, watched the way the shadows changed on the canyon walls, and tried not to think about dying in this God-forsaken place. On the fourth morning, everything changed. She heard the gunfire first, sharp cracks echoing off the rocks, then shouting and the thunder of hooves. The camp erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons, diving behind cover as bullets tore through their supplies. Clara pressed herself against the post, making herself as small as possible, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She could not see who was attacking, could not tell if this was rescue or just another group of outlaws looking to claim whatever prize Slade's gang possessed. The fight was over in minutes. When the dust settled and the ringing in her ears faded, Clara looked up to see a tall figure walking toward her through the smoke. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had seen his share of trouble and come through it intact, his hat pulled low against the morning sun. As he got closer, she could make out more details: broad shoulders, a weathered duster coat, a pistol still smoking in his right hand. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, assessing her with a look that was equal parts concern and determination. "You Clara Morgan?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel scraped across stone. She nodded, her throat too dry for words. He holstered his weapon and knelt beside her, pulling a knife from his boot. "Name is Cole Brennan. Your father hired me to find you. This is going to hurt like hell, but we need to get you free." The blade sliced through the rope with practiced efficiency, and the moment her hands came loose, Clara cried out. The pain was immediate and excruciating, blood rushing back into her cramped fingers, the damaged skin screaming in protest. She tried to pull her arms close to her body, but even that small movement sent waves of agony through her wrists. Cole caught her hands before she could tuck them away, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man who had just shot his way through a bandit camp. "Let me see," he said quietly. And there was something in his tone that made her trust him despite everything, despite the violence she had just witnessed and the stranger's face before her. Her wrists were a mess, raw and bleeding where the rope had worn through skin, the flesh swollen and discolored. Clara had seen injuries before, had helped tend wounded ranch hands and horses with cut legs, but somehow seeing her own damaged skin made her stomach turn. She looked away, focusing on the horizon instead of the wreckage of her own body. Cole was already reaching into his saddlebag, pulling out a canteen and a clean cloth. "I have got some salve back with my horse," he told her. "But first we need to clean these up and get them wrapped. Can you stand?" "I think so," Clara managed, her voice hoarse and cracking. She had not spoken in days except to plead for water, and the words felt strange in her mouth. He helped her to her feet, one hand steady at her elbow while she found her balance. The world tilted dangerously for a moment, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself to stay upright. Cole waited patiently, not rushing her, and when she nodded that she was ready, he guided her away from the post and the camp toward where his horse waited in the shade of a red rock outcropping. The animal was a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament, the kind of horse that would not spook easily. Cole tied the reins to a scraggly mesquite bush and retrieved more supplies from his pack, a tin of something that smelled like beeswax and herbs, strips of soft cotton cloth, and a leather flask that he uncapped and offered to her first. "Drink slow," he warned. "You have been without for too long. Take too much at once and you will just bring it back up." Clara sipped the water, forcing herself to follow his instructions, even though every cell in her body screamed to gulp it down. The liquid was cool and clean, the best thing she had ever tasted, and she had to physically stop herself from draining the entire flask in one go. When she finally lowered it, Cole took it back and gestured for her to sit on a flat rock. "Let me tend those wrists," he said, settling himself in front of her. "This might sting." He poured water over the wounds first, washing away dried blood and dirt, and Clara hissed through her teeth at the sensation. But his hands were steady and sure, not hesitating, and she found herself watching his face as he worked. He had the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors, fine lines around his eyes from squinting against the sun, a few days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. There was a scar running along his left cheekbone, pale and old, and another just visible at the collar of his shirt. A man marked by violence but not defined by it, if the careful way he touched her injuries was any indication. "You do this often?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than the sound of her own labored breathing. "Rescue people, I mean." Cole's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Often enough. I was a tracker for the Army, spent 5 years hunting down deserters and stolen supplies. These days I hire out for whatever needs doing. Your father sent word through Prescott that his daughter had been taken, offered good money for her safe return. I was the only one willing to ride out after Slade's gang." "Why?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. If no one else would take the job, it must be because it was too dangerous. He looked up from her wrists, those pale blue eyes meeting hers directly. Because it was the right thing to do. Because no woman deserves what those men would have done to you if someone did not come. And because I have been tracking Garrett Slade for 6 months on behalf of a widow in Tucson whose husband he killed. This was not just about the money, Miss Morgan. This was personal. The honesty in his voice struck something deep in Clara's chest. She had grown up around cowboys and ranch hands, men who spoke in grunts and single syllables, who kept their feelings buried under layers of bravado and tobacco smoke. Cole Brennan was different. He said what he meant and meant what he said, and there was a quiet strength in that which made her feel safer than she had in days. He finished cleaning her wounds and opened the tin of salve, scooping out a generous amount. "This is going to help with the pain and keep infection out," he explained. "Learned the recipe from a Chiricahua medicine woman a few years back. Works better than anything the Army doctors ever had." The salve was cool against her burning skin, and Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as Cole worked it gently into the damaged flesh. He was thorough but careful, never pressing too hard, always watching her face for signs of discomfort. When both wrists were coated, he picked up the cotton strips and began wrapping them with the same meticulous attention. "There," he said when he finished, tying off the last bandage. "That should hold until we can get you to a proper doctor. How do they feel?" Clara flexed her fingers experimentally. The pain was still there, a dull throb that she suspected would not fade for weeks, but the sharp agony had dulled to something manageable. "Better. Thank you." "We should get moving," Cole said, standing and offering her his hand. "Slade was not here when I hit the camp, which means he is either out scouting or running errands. Either way, I would rather not be around when he gets back and finds his men dead and his hostage gone." The reminder of where they were and what had just happened sent a chill through Clara despite the desert heat. She let Cole help her up and watched as he quickly broke down his supplies and secured everything back on his horse. When he was finished, he turned to her with an assessing look. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Clara said. Though in truth she was not entirely certain. Her legs felt like water, and her head still spun if she moved too quickly. But the alternative was staying here, and that was not an option she was willing to consider. Cole seemed to read the doubt in her expression because he shook his head. "You will ride with me. Ranger here can carry us both, and it will be faster if I do not have to worry about you falling off your own mount." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to prove that she was not some helpless damsel who needed constant assistance, but practicality won out over pride. She nodded, and Cole swung up into the saddle before reaching down to pull her up behind him. She settled against his back, her wrapped wrists resting carefully against his waist, and tried not to think about how close they were or how solid he felt or how her heart was beating faster than it should, given that they were not even moving yet. "Hold on," Cole said, and then they were off, the big bay gelding moving into an easy lope that ate up the ground without jarring Clara too badly. She pressed her cheek against Cole's shoulder and watched the desert landscape blur past. Red rock and scrub brush and endless blue sky, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last hour. She had been rescued. She was free. The man who had saved her had wrapped her wounds with hands as gentle as any healer and had promised her safety with a conviction that made her believe him. It should have been enough, should have filled her with relief and gratitude, and it did. But there was something else there too, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in her chest every time she remembered the way Cole had looked at her or the careful way he had touched her damaged wrists. They rode for hours, stopping only once to rest the horse and let Clara drink more water. Cole produced some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag, and though the food was plain and tough, Clara ate it gratefully. She had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her stomach. And then she had to force herself to eat slowly, mindful of Cole's earlier warning about taking too much too fast. "How far to Prescott?" she asked, washing down the last of the jerky with another careful sip of water. 2 days at this pace," Cole replied, scanning the horizon with the constant vigilance of a man used to danger. "We will camp tonight at a place I know, a box canyon with good cover and water. Tomorrow we will push hard and make it to your father's ranch by evening." 2 days. 48 more hours before Clara would be home, before she could sleep in her own bed and see her father and try to make sense of everything that had happened. It felt like both an eternity and not nearly enough time, and she was not entirely sure why the thought of reaching Prescott filled her with anything other than relief. They mounted up again and continued riding, the sun climbing higher and then beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. The desert changed colors as the light shifted, going from harsh white to gold to deep amber, and Clara found herself memorizing the way Cole sat his horse, the easy confidence in every movement, the way he seemed to be part of the landscape rather than separate from it. She must have dozed off at some point because the next thing she knew, Cole was saying her name, and the light had gone soft and purple with approaching dusk. "We are here," he said, his voice gentle enough not to startle her. "Let me help you down." The box canyon was everything he had promised, a sheltered space with high walls on 3 sides and a spring-fed pool at the far end. Cole made camp with efficient movements, unsaddling Ranger and hobbling him near the water, gathering wood for a fire, laying out bedrolls. Clara tried to help, but he waved her off. "You need rest," he said firmly. "Sit down before you fall down, Miss Morgan." "Clara," she corrected, lowering herself carefully onto one of the bedrolls, "if you saved my life, you can call me Clara." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in those pale blue eyes, and then nodded. "Clara, it is, and you can call me Cole." He got the fire going as true darkness fell, the flames casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Clara watched him work, watched the way the light played across his features, and felt that unfamiliar warmth in her chest grow stronger. She barely knew this man. He was a stranger who had appeared out of the desert violence like something from a fever dream, and yet she felt more comfortable with him than she had with men she had known her entire life. Cole must have felt her watching because he glanced up and offered a small smile. "Hungry? I have got some beans and bacon. Not much, but it is better than hardtack." "Please," Clara said, realizing she was ravenous despite having eaten earlier. Her body was starting to recover from the days of deprivation, demanding fuel and rest in equal measure. He cooked the meal in a small pot over the fire, the smell making Clara's mouth water. When it was ready, he dished out generous portions onto tin plates and handed her one along with a fork. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the occasional snort from Ranger, and Clara thought that she had never tasted anything better than those simple beans and bacon. When they finished, Cole cleaned the dishes in the pool and returned to the fire, settling across from Clara with his own cup of coffee. He had not said much during the meal, seemed content to let the quiet stretch between them, but now he looked at her with a seriousness that made her pulse quicken. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be honest with me. Are you hurt anywhere else? Did they do anything besides tie you up?" Clara understood what he was really asking, what dark possibilities he was dancing around with careful words, and she shook her head quickly. "No, they mostly ignored me. Slade threatened, but he never touched me. He wanted the ransom too badly to risk damaging the merchandise." Relief flickered across Cole's face, there and gone in an instant. "Good. That is good." He took a sip of his coffee, staring into the flames. "Your father will be glad to have you back safe." "Will he?" The bitterness in Clara's voice surprised even her. "He did not pay the ransom. 4 days those men held me, and he never sent a dime." Cole's eyes snapped to hers. "That is not true. He sent riders out looking for you the moment he got the first demand. He just did not trust Slade to honor the exchange. Too many times these things end with the victim dead and the money gone. He thought hiring someone to take you back by force was the better option." The explanation made sense. Intellectually, Clara could understand the logic. But the hurt of those days believing her father had abandoned her was not so easily dismissed. She looked down at her bandaged wrists, at the white cotton already starting to show spots of red where the wounds seeped. "I thought no one was coming." "I was always coming," Cole said quietly. "From the moment I took the job, I was always going to find you. I promise you that." There was such conviction in his voice that Clara felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built up over the days of captivity suddenly crumbling. Tears welled up without warning, spilling hot down her cheeks, and she ducked her head, embarrassed by the sudden display of emotion. She heard Cole move, and then he was beside her, one arm coming around her shoulders in a careful embrace. "It is all right," he murmured. "You are safe now. I have got you." Clara turned into his chest and let herself cry, great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, releasing all the fear and anger and helplessness she had been holding back. Cole held her through it, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back, not saying anything, just being there, solid and steady and real. When the storm finally passed, Clara pulled back, wiping at her face with the heel of her hand. "I am sorry," she said, her voice rough. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You have got nothing to apologize for," Cole told her. "You have been through hell. You are allowed to feel it." She looked up at him, at the kindness in his eyes and the gentle set of his mouth, and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. This man, this stranger, had shown her more care in one afternoon than anyone had in months. He had wrapped her wounds and fed her and held her while she cried, and he had done it all without asking for anything in return. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Cole's hand came up to brush a strand of hair back from her face, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "You do not need to thank me, Clara. I am just doing what anyone decent would do." "I think we both know that is not true," Clara replied, Decent men are in shorter supply than you might think." Something flickered in Cole's expression, a shadow of old pain or regret, but it was gone before Clara could name it. He stood, offering her his hand. "You should get some sleep. We have got another long day tomorrow." Clara let him help her to her feet and guide her to the bedroll farthest from the fire, the one he had already laid out with his own blanket folded as a pillow. She settled down carefully, mindful of her damaged wrists, and watched as Cole returned to his spot across the flames. He pulled out his pistol and checked the loads, a ritual Clara recognized from countless nights on the ranch, and then settled back against his saddle with the weapon resting on his thigh. "Are you not going to sleep?" she asked. "Eventually," Cole said. "But someone needs to keep watch. We are not in friendly territory." "Then let me take a turn. You must be exhausted." He shook his head. "You need the rest more than I do. Besides, I have gone longer than this without sleep. I will be fine." Clara wanted to argue, but the truth was that her body was already pulling her down toward unconsciousness, the warmth of the fire and the relative safety of the canyon working together to make her eyelids heavy. She watched Cole for a few more minutes, the way the firelight painted his features in shades of gold and shadow, and then sleep claimed her. She woke once in the night to find him still awake, still watching, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him what his vigilance meant to her, but sleep was already pulling her back under, and the words dissolved before they could form. When Clara woke the second time, dawn was breaking over the canyon rim, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Cole was crouched by the fire, coaxing it back to life, and there was a pot of coffee already starting to boil. He looked up as she stirred, and Clara could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the weariness he was trying to hide. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep or lack thereof. "How are the wrists?" Clara sat up slowly, taking stock of her body. Everything hurt, a deep ache that went all the way to her bones, but the sharp agony of yesterday had dulled to something more manageable. Her wrists throbbed where the bandages wrapped them, but when she flexed her fingers, the movement was easier than it had been. "Better, I think." "Did you sleep at all?" "A few hours," Cole said, which Clara suspected was a generous estimate. "Enough to keep going. We should eat and get moving. I want to put as much distance between us and that camp as possible before the day heats up." They shared a quick breakfast of more hardtack and coffee, broke camp with practiced efficiency, and were riding again before the sun cleared the canyon walls. Clara rode behind Cole again, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back, and tried not to think too hard about how right it felt to be this close to him. The day passed in a blur of heat and dust and endless riding. They stopped twice to rest the horse and stretch their legs, but Cole pushed them hard, clearly anxious to make good time. Clara did not complain, did not point out that every bone in her body felt like it had been rattled loose because she could see the tension in Cole's shoulders and knew he was worried about pursuit. It was late afternoon when they spotted the dust cloud on the horizon behind them, a telltale sign of riders moving fast. Cole pulled Ranger to a halt and turned in the saddle, his hand dropping automatically to his pistol. "How many?" Clara asked, shading her eyes against the sun. "Hard to say. 4, maybe 5. Cole's jaw tightened. "Could be Slade. Could be someone else. Either way, I do not want to stick around and find out." He urged Ranger into a gallop, pushing the big horse harder than he had all day. Clara held on tight, her heart hammering, the momentary peace of the morning shattering into sharp-edged fear. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, Cole constantly checking over his shoulder, the dust cloud behind them growing steadily closer. Finally, he pulled up beside a tumble of boulders and swung down from the saddle. "We make a stand here," he said, already pulling his rifle from the saddle scabbard. "Better to choose the ground than let them run us down." Clara dismounted on shaky legs, watching as Cole positioned himself behind the rocks with practiced ease. He checked his weapons methodically, rifle loaded, pistol ready, knife within easy reach, and then glanced back at her. "Stay low and stay quiet," he instructed. "If shooting starts, you get behind those rocks over there and you do not move until I tell you it is safe. Understand?" Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. This was not how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to ride safely to Prescott, supposed to arrive at her father's ranch with nothing more than dust and sore muscles to show for the journey. But the Wild West did not care about supposed to, and Clara had learned that lesson too many times to count. The riders came into view, 5 men on horseback pushing their mounts hard. Even from a distance, Clara recognized Garrett Slade's distinctive black hat and long coat. The outlaw leader sat his horse like a man born to the saddle, and there was murder in every line of his body. Cole fired a warning shot, the crack of the rifle echoing off the rocks. The riders pulled up short, spreading out in a loose line, and Slade urged his horse forward a few paces. "Brennan," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air, "I should have known. You have been a thorn in my side for too long." "And you have been a plague on decent folks for even longer," Cole shouted back. "Turn around and ride away, Slade. This does not have to end bloody." Slade laughed, the sound cold and humorless. "You killed half my men and stole my leverage. This was always going to end bloody. Only question is whether it is your blood or mine." "Then I guess we have got our answer," Cole said, and fired again, not a warning shot this time. The world exploded into violence. The outlaws returned fire, bullets whining off the rocks, and Cole worked his rifle with smooth precision, each shot deliberate and aimed. Clara pressed herself into the shelter he had indicated, her hands over her ears trying to block out the sounds of gunfire and shouting and the terrible meaty thud of a bullet finding flesh. It seemed to go on forever, but in reality it was probably less than 5 minutes. When the shooting stopped, Clara cautiously lifted her head and saw 3 of the outlaws sprawled motionless on the ground. A 4th was riding hell-bent for the horizon, hunched over his saddle, clearly wounded, and Garrett Slade sat his horse with his hands raised, his face twisted in fury and pain. Blood stained his right shoulder, spreading dark across his coat. Cole stood from behind his cover, rifle trained on Slade, and walked forward slowly. "Dismount," he ordered, slow and careful. Slade complied, moving stiffly, and Clara could see that the wound was bad enough to be painful, but not immediately life-threatening. Cole disarmed him efficiently, tossing the outlaw's weapons out of reach, and then backed up to a safe distance. "You will bleed out before you make it anywhere for help," Cole said flatly. "But that is a choice you made when you decided to kidnap innocent women and hold them for ransom. I should kill you right here and save the hangman a job." "So do it," Slade spat. "Pull the trigger, Brennan, or are you too much of a coward?" Cole's finger tightened on the trigger, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually do it. But then he lowered the rifle and shook his head. "No. You are going to stand trial for everything you have done. The widow in Tucson deserves to see you hang legal and proper, and I am not going to take that from her." He pulled out a bandana and tossed it to Slade. "Tie that around your shoulder. It might buy you enough time to reach a doctor if you ride smart. But if I ever see you again, if I ever hear about you hurting another innocent person, I will not be so generous. Clear?" Slade caught the cloth and pressed it to his wound, his face gray with pain and rage. "Crystal." "Then get out of my sight." The outlaw mounted his horse with difficulty and rode off toward the south, swaying in the saddle, and Cole watched until he disappeared from view. Only then did he lower his rifle and turn back to Clara, and she saw the exhaustion and the cost of the violence written plainly on his face. "Are you hurt?" she asked, hurrying over to him, her eyes scanning for blood or injury. "No," Cole said, his voice flat and drained, "but we need to move. That one who got away might circle back with reinforcements, and I'm not interested in another fight." They left the bodies where they had fallen, too conscious of time and danger to spare any thought for burial, and rode away from the rocks as the sun began its descent toward evening. Cole was silent, his jaw tight, and Clara wanted to say something to ease whatever burden he was carrying but could not find the words. Finally, as the light turned golden and long shadows stretched across the desert, Cole spoke. "I am sorry you had to see that." "You saved my life," Clara said simply. "Again, I think I can handle seeing you defend it." "It is not just about defense," Cole replied, his voice heavy. "Taking a life, even when it is necessary, it leaves a mark. I did not want you to have to witness that darkness." Clara reached around him and placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady beneath her palm. "You are not dark, Cole Brennan. You are the best man I have ever met." He covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently, and they rode on through the gathering dusk until they reached another sheltered spot to make camp. This time, when Cole started to build the fire and prepare their meal, Clara insisted on helping despite her protesting body. She needed to do something, needed to feel useful rather than just a burden being transported. They worked together in comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm that felt natural despite the short time they had known each other. When the food was ready and they sat down to eat, Clara found herself studying Cole's profile in the firelight, memorizing the strong line of his jaw and the way his hair fell across his forehead. "What will you do after you deliver me home?" she asked, the question emerging before she had fully thought it through. "Where will you go?" Cole considered for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I do not know. I have been moving from job to job for so long that I have not thought much beyond the next contract. Maybe it is time to settle somewhere, buy a piece of land, and try to build something lasting." "You could stay in Prescott," Clara suggested, her heart beating faster. "My father is always looking for good men. The ranch is big enough that we need help year-round, and you have certainly proven yourself capable." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something flicker in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Is that what you want, Clara? For me to stay?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications and possibilities that neither of them had voiced, but both understood. Clara could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, could sense that her answer would determine something important about their future. She met his gaze steadily, her heart in her throat, and spoke the truth. "Yes, I want you to stay." For a heartbeat, Cole did not move, did not react, and Clara felt panic start to rise. But then he was setting down his plate and moving around the fire, settling beside her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with the same careful gentleness he had shown when wrapping her wrists. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, "I am a drifter with a violent past and no prospects. You deserve better than someone like me." "You are wrong," Clara told him fiercely. "You are brave and kind and honorable, and those things matter more than prospects or past mistakes. I have known rich men and settled men, and none of them had half your character." Cole's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, his touch feather-light. "I am not good at pretty words. I do not know how to court a woman properly. But from the moment I saw you tied up in that camp, something in me just knew that finding you was not just about the job or the money or even about justice for that widow. Knew that you were going to matter to me in ways I could not even understand yet." "Then stay," Clara whispered, turning her face into his palm. "Stay and let me matter to you. Let us see where this goes." Cole's answer was not in words. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and searching and full of unspoken promise. Clara melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and for the first time since her kidnapping, she felt something other than fear and pain and exhaustion. She felt hope. They drew apart eventually, both breathing hard, and Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I will stay," he said quietly. "As long as you will have me, I will stay." Clara smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face after so many days of terror, but real and genuine nonetheless. Then I guess you had better get used to Arizona, Cowboy, because I have no intention of letting you go." They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories about their lives and their pasts, learning each other in the way that new lovers do. Clara told him about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died when she was 12, and her father who had tried his best to raise a daughter alone. Cole spoke of his time in the army, of the violence he had seen and the friends he had lost, and the decision to leave behind that life in search of something better. When exhaustion finally claimed them both, Cole laid out the bedrolls close together this time, and Clara fell asleep with his arm around her waist and the steady rhythm of his breathing in her ear. She felt safe in a way she had not felt in days, protected not just by Cole's vigilance, but by the connection growing between them, fragile as new growth, but already putting down roots. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and they rode the final stretch to Prescott with a lightness that had been absent before. Clara could feel the tension in Cole's shoulders had eased, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment, and she tightened her arms around his waist in silent acknowledgement of what was building between them. They reached the Morgan Ranch in late afternoon, the familiar sight of the house and barns and corrals making Clara's throat tight with emotion. She had wondered if she would ever see this place again, had spent dark hours in that bandit camp imagining dying in the desert without ever making it home. But here she was, alive and healing, and accompanied by a man who had become impossibly important in just 3 days. Her father met them in the yard, his weathered face creasing with relief when he saw Clara. "Thank God," he said, reaching up to help her down from the horse. "Thank God you are all right." Clara hugged him fiercely, ignoring the protest of her wounded wrists, and let him hold her while he murmured reassurances and apologies. When they finally separated, she turned to Cole, who had dismounted and stood holding the ranger's reins, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "Papa, this is Cole Brennan. He is the one who found me and brought me home. He saved my life." Thomas Morgan was a big man, broad-shouldered and strong despite his 50-odd years, and he crossed the space between them to shake Cole's hand with visible emotion. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said gruffly. "Name your price, Brennan. Whatever you want, it is yours." Cole shook his head. "The fee we agreed on is more than fair, Mr. Morgan. I did not do this for extra payment." "Then at least stay for supper," Thomas insisted. "Let us feed you properly and give your horse a rest. It is the least we can do." Clara caught Cole's eye and smiled, and after a moment he nodded. "Supper would be welcome, thank you." The house was full of people that evening, ranch hands and neighbors who had heard about Clara's safe return and came to welcome her home. It was overwhelming and wonderful and exhausting all at once, and Clara found herself seeking out Cole's steady presence whenever the crowd got too loud or the questions too intrusive. He stayed close, a quiet guardian, and she loved him a little more for understanding without being told that she needed his support. It was late when the last visitor finally left, and Thomas Morgan ushered Cole into his study with a glass of whiskey and a serious expression. Clara waited in the hallway, not quite eavesdropping but definitely listening, and felt her heart race when she heard her father speak. "My daughter seems fond of you," Thomas said bluntly, "and from what I have observed tonight, the feeling is mutual." "Yes, sir," Cole replied, his voice steady. "I care for Clara very much. I know it is fast, and I know I'm not the kind of man most fathers would want for their daughter, but I promise you I will do right by her if she will have me." There was a long silence, and then Thomas laughed, a deep, booming sound that made Clara smile despite her nervousness. "Brennan, you rode into an outlaw camp alone and brought my daughter home safe. You protected her, tended her injuries, and fought off pursuit to get her here. As far as I am concerned, you are exactly the kind of man I want for Clara. The question is, what are your intentions?" "I would like your permission to court her properly," Cole said, "and if she agrees, I would like to stay on here and work for you. I am a decent hand with horses and cattle, and I can earn my keep while I prove myself worthy of her." "Permission granted," Thomas said immediately, "and the job is yours if you want it. We can always use someone with your skills. But fair warning, Brennan, my daughter is strong-willed and independent, and she will not make things easy on you. She gets that from her mother. I would not want it any other way, sir. Clara did not wait to hear more. She burst into the study with a grin that probably gave away exactly how much she had been listening, and Cole stood up from his chair with an answering smile that made her heart skip several beats. Her father took one look at them and shook his head with fond exasperation. I will leave you two to talk, he said, heading for the door, but keep it respectable. This is still my house. When they were alone, Cole crossed to where Clara stood and took her hands carefully, mindful of the bandages still wrapped around her wrists. So, he said, I have your father's permission to court you properly, but I need to know if that is what you want. These last few days have been intense, and I do not want you to feel obligated just because I brought you home. Clara looked up at him, at this good, brave man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known to speak, and felt certainty settle deep in her bones. Cole Brennan, I have never felt obligated about anything in my life, and I am not starting now. I want you to court me. I want you to stay, and I want to see where this takes us because I have a feeling it is going to be somewhere amazing. His smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise, and when he kissed her this time, it was with the confidence of a man who knew he was exactly where he belonged. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Clara's life. Cole moved into the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands and threw himself into the work with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He was good with the horses, patient and firm, and the cattle seemed to respond to him as well. Thomas Morgan watched him carefully for the first few weeks, and then stopped watching, satisfied that Cole Brennan was as solid and trustworthy as he appeared. Cole courted Clara the old-fashioned way, with Sunday picnics and evening walks, and careful attention to propriety that she found both charming and occasionally frustrating. But there was also heat beneath the respectability, stolen kisses in the barn, and long conversations under the stars where they shared dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Clara's wrists healed slowly, the rope burns fading to thin white scars that she sometimes traced absently, remembering the moment Cole had first touched her with such gentleness. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, it became increasingly clear to everyone on the ranch that Cole and Clara were heading towards something permanent. They fit together like two pieces of a puzzle, her fire balancing his steady calm, his quiet strength supporting her fierce independence. When Cole asked Thomas for Clara's hand on a cold December evening, the older man gave his blessing without hesitation, and the whole ranch celebrated the engagement with a party that lasted well into the night. They were married in the spring of 1883, a simple ceremony in Prescott's small church with half the town in attendance. Clara wore her mother's dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers from the desert. Cole stood at the altar in a new suit that he had clearly never worn before, looking uncomfortable and impossibly handsome. And when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. Clara felt her heart overflow with love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's guidance, with Cole working as foreman. Clara threw herself into the business side of things, keeping the books and managing supplies, and together she and Cole made plans for their future. They built a small house on the edge of the property, close enough to the main ranch for convenience, but far enough for privacy, and Clara spent happy months decorating it and making it theirs. Their first child, a son they named Daniel, was born in the winter of 1884, and Cole proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. Clara watched him cradle their tiny son with the same careful gentleness he had shown her damaged wrists years before, and felt her love for him deepen into something that felt as essential as breathing. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Elizabeth, with her father's pale blue eyes and her mother's determination, the house filled with laughter and noise and the particular chaos that comes with young children. And Clara sometimes paused in the middle of the everyday madness to marvel at how different her life had become from those dark days in the outlaw camp. Thomas Morgan passed peacefully in his sleep in 1889, And though the grief was sharp, Clara took comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy and settled with a good man. Cole took over running the ranch with Clara as his full partner, and together they expanded the operation, buying adjacent land and building the Morgan Ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Clara and Cole would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes Clara would run her fingers over the thin scars on her wrists, those permanent reminders of the violence that had brought them together, and Cole would take her hands and kiss the damaged skin with infinite tenderness. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one such evening, when they had been married nearly 8 years. "Taking that job? Coming after me?" Cole pulled her close, tucking her against his side in the easy intimacy of long partnership. "Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Brennan. You and those wild children of ours are everything I never knew I needed." "We are lucky," Clara said softly, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. "So many things could have gone wrong. You could have arrived too late, or Slade could have killed you, or I could have died in that desert before you ever found me. But somehow, against all odds, we found each other." "I do not think it was luck," Cole replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I think some things are just meant to be, and we were always meant to find each other, one way or another." Clara smiled and laced her fingers through his, feeling the calluses that years of ranch work had worn into his palms, marks of a different kind from her own scars. They were both marked by their pasts, shaped by violence and loss and hardship, but they had found something beautiful together despite it all. Or maybe because of it all. Maybe the darkness made the light that much brighter, made them appreciate the peace and love they had built in the Arizona desert. Daniel came running out onto the porch just then, still in his nightshirt, with Elizabeth toddling behind him. "Papa, Mama, I could not sleep," he announced. "The moon is too bright." Cole scooped his son up with one arm and caught his daughter with the other, settling both children on his lap despite their combined weight. "Well, if we cannot sleep, I guess we'll just have to tell stories. Clara, you want to start, or should I?" "You tell one," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder and wrapping her arms around their small family. "Tell them about the time you tracked a mountain lion for 3 days without stopping." As Cole launched into the tale, embellishing it for the children's benefit, Clara closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of desert sage and her husband's familiar scent and the sweet soap smell of her children. This was her life now. Not perfect, certainly not easy, but hers in every way that mattered. She had survived violence and fear and came out the other side stronger, had found love in the most unexpected place, and built a family that was her whole world. The scars on her wrists were barely visible now, faded to thin white lines that most people never noticed. But Clara remembered. She remembered the pain and the fear and the hopelessness of those days in captivity. And she remembered more clearly the moment Cole Brennan had knelt beside her with gentle hands and kind eyes and promised her safety. He had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined, had given her not just rescue but a future, not just protection but partnership and love that deepened with every passing year. They sat together on the porch until the children's eyes grew heavy and sleep finally claimed them despite the bright moon. Cole carried them inside and tucked them into their beds while Clara watched from the doorway, her heart full to bursting. When he emerged, he took her hand and led her to their own room, closing the door softly behind them. "I love you," Clara said, the words as natural as breathing after all these years, but no less meaningful. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "And I love you," Cole replied, pulling her into his arms. "From that first moment in the desert until my last breath, you are my home, Clara. You are everything." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease and familiarity of long partnership, but still with the spark that had ignited between them from the very beginning. Afterward, curled together in the darkness, Clara traced the scar on Cole's shoulder from a bullet wound he had taken the year before while stopping a cattle rustler, and he ran his fingers over the faded marks on her wrists, and they held each other close, two survivors who had found their way to safety in each other's arms. Years continued to pass. Their family grew. Another son in 1891, twins in 1894, and the ranch prospered. Cole's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread throughout the territory, and when Arizona finally achieved statehood in 1912, he was one of the men consulted about the transition. Clara managed the business side with the same fierce intelligence she brought to everything, and together they weathered droughts and economic downturns and all the challenges that came with building a legacy in unforgiving country. Daniel grew up to be a skilled horseman and took over much of the day-to-day ranch operations. Elizabeth became a teacher, opening a school in Prescott for children whose families could not afford the established institutions. Their younger children carved out their own paths, some staying close to home, and others venturing out into the wider world, but all of them carrying the values their parents had instilled: integrity, compassion, and the bone-deep understanding that real strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, Clara and Cole rode out into the desert together, following old trails to places they had not visited in years. They found the box canyon where they had first camped together, the spring still flowing clear and cold, and made a fire as the sun set, just as they had done all those years before. "Do you remember that night?" Clara asked, sitting close to Cole, her head on his shoulder. "When I asked you to stay and you kissed me for the first time?" "I remember everything about those days," Cole said, his voice soft with memory. "The way you looked with your wrists all bandaged, the sound of your voice when you cried, the moment I realized I was falling in love with you and there was not a damn thing I could do to stop it." "Would you want to stop it?" Clara asked. "If you could go back, knowing everything that was coming, the hard times along with the good, would you change anything?" Cole turned to look at her, his pale blue eyes still sharp despite the gray in his hair and the lines that life had carved into his face. "Not a single thing. Every moment, every choice, every challenge brought me here to this life with you. I would live it all again exactly the same way, just to end up right here, right now, with you beside me." Clara kissed him then, pouring 25 years of love and partnership and shared history into that single gesture, and Cole kissed her back with the same intensity. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Clara laughed and shook her head. "We are too old to be acting like newlyweds," she said, though there was no real complaint in her voice. "Speak for yourself," Cole replied with a grin. "I am just getting started." They stayed in the canyon that night, sleeping under the stars the way they had on that first journey home, and Clara thought about how strange and wonderful it was that such darkness could lead to such light. The kidnapping that had seemed like the worst thing that could ever happen had actually been the catalyst for the best thing. Meeting Cole, falling in love, building this life together. She would not wish that violence and fear on anyone, but she also could not regret the path that had led her here. As she drifted off to sleep in Cole's arms, lulled by the familiar rhythm of his breathing and the desert sounds around them, Clara sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the universe. For second chances and gentle hands and promises kept. For love found in unlikely places and scars that had healed into something stronger. For a cowboy who had wrapped her damaged wrists with infinite care and had continued wrapping her life in safety and love for more than 2 decades. They rode home the next morning, taking their time, and when they crested the rise that overlooked their ranch, the house they had built, the barns and corrals, the land they had worked so hard to nurture, Clara felt the same swell of pride and contentment she always did. This was theirs. This life, this legacy, this love that had started in the desert violence and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Cole reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and they rode down the hill toward home side by side, The way they had faced everything for 25 years and the way they would continue to face whatever came for however many years they had left. Together. Always together. The sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, and Clara thought about the girl she had been at 23, terrified and hurting and certain she was going to die alone in a bandit camp. That girl would never have believed that such darkness could transform into such light, that the worst days of her life would lead directly to the best. But here she was, 48 years old and stronger than she had ever been, riding beside the love of her life toward the home they had built with their own hands and hearts. The scars on her wrists caught the sunlight, thin white lines barely visible now, but Clara smiled at them affectionately. They were part of her story, part of what had made her who she was. The pain had faded, but the memory remained not as trauma but as testament to survival and resilience and the transformative power of gentle hands and promises kept. And as they rode through the gates of their ranch, surrounded by the life they had created together, Clara knew with absolute certainty that every moment of darkness had been worth it for the lifetime of light that followed. Worth it for Cole's love, for their children, for this legacy they would leave behind. Worth it for the simple joy of riding home through the Arizona desert with her husband's hand warm in hers and the future stretching bright and endless before them.